Secretary Austin underscored the ironclad U.S. commitment to Israel, as evidenced in part by the extraordinary defense of Israel against an unprecedented Iranian attack on April 13, and by the more than $14 billion in assistance in the National Security Supplemental. During the discussion, Secretary Austin stressed that Lebanese Hezbollah's provocations threaten to drag the Israeli and Lebanese people into a war that neither of them wants, and that such a war would be catastrophic for Lebanon, and it would be devastating for innocent Israeli and Lebanese civilians. Secretary Austin also reiterated the high priority of securing the safe release of all hostages held captive by Hamas, including American citizens. He commended Minister Gallant for Israel's support for the comprehensive ceasefire and hostage release proposal that it has offered, which President Biden has outlined and the United Nations Security Council has endorsed. They agree that the onus is on Hamas to accept this deal. Secretary Austin stressed that principled diplomacy is the only way to prevent any further escalation of tensions in the region. Additionally, Secretary Austin urged Minister Gallant to double down on efforts to protect Palestinian civilians and humanitarian aid workers in Gaza. The Secretary and Minister discussed ways to improve the distribution of humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians in dire need and to strengthen the deconfliction mechanisms for humanitarian workers. A full readout will be posted to the DoD website later today.
You mentioned civilian casualties was an issue that was discussed this morning between Austin and Gallant. Did the Secretary receive any commitment or assurances from the Israeli Defense Minister to reduce civilian casualties?
I'm not going to be able to go into more details than what I provided in that readout there, Idris, other than to say again, and I don't want to speak for Minister Gallant, other than to say again that this is a priority for Secretary Austin in terms of protecting civilians, and that is something that has come up in every single conversation that they have.
Do you feel that it's a priority for the Israelis as well?
I'm not going to, again, characterize Minister Gallant's words. I think the Secretary recognizes that his message is being received loud and clear. And again, we're going to continue to highlight how important it is. I mean, you heard it in his opening comments, right? It's both a moral obligation and a strategic imperative. So,
the Russian Defense Minister, who initiated the call?
The Secretary did. Yep, let me go to you, sir.
Rashid Jafar, Al Gat TV, Egypt. The Secretary has indicated that diplomacy is the best way to prevent the recent tensions between Lebanon and between Hezbollah and Israel from escalating into a full-blown war. What has been discussed in the talks between the Secretary and his Israeli counterpart on this issue?
Well, again, as I highlighted at the top, we think that no one wins if there's a broader regional conflict. And so that's something that the Department of Defense in the United States has been working very hard at ever since Hamas's attack on October 7th. And so the Secretary has been clear both publicly and privately that we firmly believe that a diplomatic resolution to the tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border are the way to go and to prevent a potential escalation, and especially in this type of situation where there's a risk of miscalculation that no one wants to see. Yes, sir.
Thank you, General. Regarding to the escalation of the border between Lebanon and Israel, do you still believe that the diplomatic resolution is still possible? And today, after the meeting between Secretary Austin and his Israeli counterpart, did you see that the Israeli agree to go with Secretary Austin assessment about this solution as a diplomatic? Do they agree with that path? And even though did they agree with what Secretary Austin says about that any another war between Hezbollah and Israel could easily become a regional war?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to speak for Minister Gallant or the Israeli delegation. I'll allow them to do that. But to answer your question, yes, we do think that a diplomatic resolution is possible, and that's something that we'll continue to work with all parties involved on to achieve for the reasons that I spelled out. Fadi.
Thank you, General. So Minister Gallant said today that the U.S. and Israel are working to achieve an agreement about the tension on the borders between Israel and Lebanon. But he added we must also discuss readiness for every possible scenario. Did the Secretary discuss such scenarios with Mr. Gallant? I think he was alluding to war, maybe?
Well, again, as you can appreciate, I'm not going to speak for Minister Gallant or his comments. I will say, again, that they did have a discussion about the tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border. The Secretary, again, highlighted the importance of finding a diplomatic resolution to those tensions. It was a very frank, candid, professional conversation and robust. So lots of discussion on the situation as it relates to Lebanon, but I'll just leave it there.
General, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Israel is ready to fight two wars on two fronts, and today the Israeli defense minister said in the room that they're determined to actually establish security in the north and change the reality on the ground. So if that were to happen, with seeing from the Secretary that it's not a hypothetical anymore, but a calculation in this department that it could turn into a full-blown war in the region, if that were to happen, can Israel rely on the United States militarily? Because we've seen this play out before, that you said one thing, Israel did another, but you were still behind them militarily. So can that still be the case?
So I appreciate the question, and I will respectfully disagree that it's not a hypothetical. It is a hypothetical. I mean, certainly that is a scenario that could happen, but it hasn't yet. And so our focus right now is on finding a diplomatic solution to the tensions that are along the border there. As I highlighted at the top, our support for Israel's inherent right to self-defense is ironclad. It will remain that way. We'll continue to support Israel and their ability to defend themselves. But when it comes to the tensions along the border, when it comes to the broader region, we don't want to see a broader regional conflict. And so that will continue to be a primary focus of this department and this government.